Hello everyone, this is theme 2 and part 1 or part 1 in theme 2. In this theme we will talk about the research problem. Considering that the research problem is the initial stage in any research investigation. Research starts by a problem. Research does not start by a title. In this part 1 of theme 2 we are going to cover 3 points. Number 1, scientific thinking. We shall present and discuss what we mean by scientific thinking, which is an important requirement when conducting any research investigation. Second one, we'll try to understand and look for what a research problem is, which is very important for any researcher to know. And third point concerns selecting a research problem. What are the considerations that one has to take into account before selecting a research problem and before starting his or her research investigation. Now, let's talk about the first point in this presentation, which is about scientific thinking. We can read that scientific thinking is an inductive, deductive mode of thinking or reasoning. Induction here is to move from particular to general, and deduction, on the other hand, is to move from general to particular. Scientific thinking starts with facts and returns to facts to test and verify its hypotheses. And scientific thinking, of course, aims to establish the relationships between the variables based on evidences. In a brief, if we want to summarize these statements regarding scientific thinking, we can say that in any research investigation, any research work, scientific thinking is a must. We have to bear this way of thinking, considering that when thinking, we have different types of thinking. But for any research study, scientific thinking is important. Why? Because this can give your investigation by the end more credibility and assures that it is based on logical reasoning and based on actual facts, and it's verified, it is tested, it tests your hypotheses, it tests what you think is needs to be tested and verified. It replicates your study. So scientific thinking, as I have said so far, is very important to consider in order to ensure more credibility for your research study or your first research investigation. Now, let's talk about the research problem. And I just want to focus on this important element in a research study, the research problem. Why? Because there is common practice that is considered to be wrong practice that especially novice researchers usually commit, which is when it comes to start or to conduct any research work, they think at the first time, they usually think in terms of formulating a title and then starting doing research. I think this is a very wrong practice. Why? Because in fact, according to research methodology, according to the research methodologists, research never starts by a title. It starts by a problem. A problem that you have to think of it from the very beginning. Of course, this problem should satisfy some conditions that should be present, including, for example, that the problem should fall within your specialty. The problem should be within the area of your research study. The problem should concern the domain of your study. Before we go on and talk about in details about what a problem is. Of course, a problem, how can one comes up with a problem? Generally, we have three sources to think of a problem. First one is that the problem comes from your observation, and here we have to mention and to state that a good observer, a good researcher, one of the qualities that he or she should have is to be a good observer. So a problem can come from your observation. To what observation? To what surrounds you in the domain of your study. Something else concerning the source of a problem is that from the problem can come up from your experience. from what you have experienced, either as a student or as a teacher, what you have experienced in your teaching career, what you have observed in your learning career or your teaching learning careers. So from these experience, you can come with a researchable and a very feasible problem. And the third one is, as a source for a problem, is that for some researchers, they can come up with the problem by reading, and from the readings, of course, again, in the domain of study, on the domain of research, they can, within the reading they can find a gap, and this gap can be a problem too, and this problem can be something that they can research. So overall, we can say that a research problem is a difficulty which a researcher experiences in the theoretical or practical situation and wants to obtain a solution. A research problem is one which requires the researcher to find out the best solution by which cause of action the objectives can be obtained optimally in the context of a given context. Of course, from these two statements, we have talked before about the problem, but there's something which is very important, which is you cannot think of a problem without you think of the solution to that problem. Of course, this solution, you think of it, it won't be something that is perfect. It could be something that you suggest. And of course, your study will tell you and tell others whether the solution you have chosen is the suitable one to this problem. That means you think of a problem, and it's not enough. Usually you think of a problem and you think of what the solution of this problem is. And your study will tell you whether the problem and the solution are the good, the solution is the good solution to that problem. Of course, some characteristics that you should consider as a researcher whenever you choose a problem. Amongst these characteristics, number one, regarding the research problem, is that the research problem should be of a great interest to you. Of course, this is very obvious. When you choose a problem to investigate, it should be of a great interest to you. That means you should like it. If something you don't like it, it's not easy. It will be difficult to investigate, to study. Generally, we talk about two aspects here. Something that is of a great interest to you, at the same time, something that is interesting. That means it is significant. What we mean by significant here? It means it is useful, not for you only, but for others. So when you do something, you do it because you like it. At the same time, for others, they can get profit and they can get benefit from it. Of course, this is what is mentioned in the second statement. The research problem should be significant, means it should be useful for others. That means the others, because when you do research, you are addressing a certain audience. So what you give them as a study, it should be useful for them. Those who are interested in your study, they will get benefit from what you have conducted as a research investigation. Of course, the research problem should be delineated. What we mean by delineated? It means it should be outlined and clearly described. Of course, when you identify a problem, you have to thoroughly and comprehensively and thoroughly describe this outline and describe this research problem. The researcher should be able to obtain the required information. Of course, this is very obvious. When you do research and you think of a problem, you think of a problem that is manageable. A problem that is not manageable, that means something that is very challenging. It's very difficult to investigate, to research. So from the very beginning, you have to answer this question: am I able to conduct this research work based on this research problem? If the answer is affirmative, it's okay, you go on. If from the beginning the answer is negative, so you give up and you have to leave this research problem because it's very challenging, and as a researcher, you are not able to carry out a research investigation. The research should be able to draw conclusions related to the problem. Again, here from the very beginning, you ask the question: am I able to conduct this study? Am I able to complete this study? Am I able to come up with some conclusions by the end of this study, and then to draw some conclusions? If the answer is affirmative, you go on. If from the beginning you will get some idea is that you are not able to carry out this investigation from the very beginning. You have to give up and to leave this research work. The researcher should be able to state the problem clearly and concise. Of course, there are two processes. In any research study, any researcher has to consider. The first one is to identify a problem. Identifying a problem, it means to come up with a problem, a solvable problem, a feasible problem, a problem that you can research, a problem that is interesting to you, the problem that interests your audience, the others. And then when you have to identify this problem, and the problem is okay, is present, now there is a second stage or second process, which is the statement of the problem. Now you have to state your problem. Generally, the statement of the problem is the outlining concisely and clearly, the description concisely and clearly of the problem. And generally, this is what appears in the written product, either at the beginning when you present your research project in the research proposal, or when you start drafting your dissertation or your thesis. This is what appears in your dissertation and thesis. Generally, this appears in the general introduction of your dissertation or general introduction of your thesis. And now let's move to the ways how any researcher has to follow in order to select a research problem, and what he or she has to consider when selecting a problem. Generally, we consider novelty and avoidance of unnecessary duplication. Here there is something that I want to mention here. Generally, there is a common idea that we usually hear about novelty. Some people, they think that a good research study, a good research work is something that has not been done before. What we refer to it, something that is new. I think on this point, from a very methodological perspective, it's not it's not something very precise. Why? Because talking about novelty does not mean something that is very new. Which means, in other words, you can investigate something that has been investigated by others, but it should be original. What we mean by original, it means that there should be your own touch. There is your own perspective or perspectives regarding what you are researching. This means that here, in other words, that in research there is no problem if you replicate other works, another work that has been done by others. And here you have to make a difference between two terms: replication and duplication. Replication, it's okay. Duplication, it's not okay. Which means that duplication, it's wholly you repeat a study that has been done before. This is not welcome. It's not a good practice. However, replication, it's okay. You can replicate. You can do to check, to verify, for example, a study that has been done before by someone else. You can revise it. You can give your own touch, your own perspective. You can change the methodology and opt for another methodology. You can opt for a different setting. You can opt for another population, another sample. So in this case, even if this study has been done before by others, there is your own perspective. There is your own touch, and this is not this is not a wrong practice in research. It is a good practice. This is to avoid the idea and to eliminate what is currently said by many people, many researchers talking about consumed. There is no consumed topic. If there is a scientific replication, I'm talking here about replication, not about duplication. Of course, the second thing about to consider when selecting a research problem, of course, it should be interesting. It should be you should be interested in it. The researcher should be trained. He should be skillful. He should be knowledgeable enough at the beginning, and with time, of course, he can develop his skills, research skills. He can or she can develop his or her research knowledge. The special working conditions should be appropriate and suitable. Of course, this will help the researcher to carry out and conduct his or her research study. The approachability of the sample. Generally, this is a question that we have to ask at the very beginning of our research investigation, which means that we have to ask the question whether by the way, this concerns some of the conditions that should be satisfied from the very beginning, and it concerns some questions that need to be raised and answered. If all the answers are affirmative, we go on. We do research. We do that research work. If we find some answers are negative, so we have to leave and give up this research. One of them is the approachability of the sample. Approachability means, in other words, the accessibility, whether your sample is accessible. If it's accessible, you go on. If it's not accessible, you leave this research study. The cost. Sometimes some people, they choose a very challenging research study, investigation. They need to use money. It's very expensive. So in this case, if the researcher has not this the ability to pay, or the ability or thinks that what he will do is expensive and costly, so the researcher needs to eliminate and give up, and no need to do that research work, and think of something else that is very where the possibility to carry out this study is better and is easier. And the last element concerns these conditions, is time factor. So the researcher has to ask the question, am I able to complete my study in due time? If the answer is affirmative, you go on. If the answer is negative, so again, here the research has to give up. Which means, in other words, from the very beginning, the research has to evaluate the time factor. Some research studies, they need a long time. And for example, at the master level, generally students are required to complete their master researches within a very specific time limit. One academic year or one semester. So if the research study goes beyond this time limit, so there is no need to carry out this study. Overall, we have to consider all these conditions. If the answers are affirmative, again, so you go on. If the answers are, let's say, negative, the researcher has no more to do that research, and again, to think of something more manageable, more easy to carry out. And by the end, of course, this will help the researcher to finish and complete his research work in due time. Thank you very much indeed.